On a train track and you see the train coming at you, the best thing you can do is get out of the way. And what was very clear was that when it came to the construction of these two stadiums, people could have difference of opinions, people could think that it was a waste of money, people could say all sorts of things. But the civic community, the business community, and then eventually, as a result, the political community all aligned behind it. And so from my perspective as mayor and from the perspective of a number of other people from the city, the question then became, how do we take advantage of this opportunity? If all this money is going to be invested, for the city of Cincinnati to actually benefit from this, to really benefit from this, it would mean how do we use this opportunity, since it's going to happen, to actually create a place of residential, commercial, and retail development at the riverfront. So they can have their stadiums, but how do we actually get something for the city that increases its tax base and really makes us more attractive? So knowing that, and the citizens of not just the city of Cincinnati, but Hamilton County, where we're located, actually passed a sales tax increase to fund the stadiums, we started a planning process that included not just the stadiums, but included the entire riverfront. And the first thing we did is we invited the entire community in. And I can't emphasize how important that was. We invited the community in to say to us, to tell us, what was their vision? What was it that they wanted to see at what really was going to be their riverfront built with their dollars? What were the amenities? What type of community did they want? And what we heard loud and clear is that they wanted a new neighborhood, that they wanted a place that was accessible to all. They actually did want to see a new park system developed, and they wanted to see the city reconnected to its riverfront, the park system developed, Fort Washington Way removed as a barrier, centralized parking so that the pressure on downtown to tear down buildings could be relieved, as well as to make sure that there, between the two stadiums, that economic development sites were actually preserved. And finally, that we wanted to link it with public transportation and preserve the views from downtown and the riverfront. And this was the plan that resulted, which actually located the stadiums, carved out the areas that would be for development, put in place the fundamental outline of a riverfront park system, and most importantly, underneath that economic development did include parking, because the only way to have that development occur at the riverfront was to raise all of it out of the floodplain, and you could only do it through parking. That was in 1996 through 2000 that the plans put in place. We didn't actually start construction of the parking garages. The stadiums got built, not a problem. I can assure you that was going to happen. But we could not actually get the financing together until the 2000s. But then, in 2008, we actually started construction. Let me back up just a second. Started construction with the parking decks. They went into place. We actually began to see the outlines of what the full build-out would begin to look like. And last Monday, on opening day, this is what that riverfront that was flooded looked like when everybody from the region who's a Cincinnati Reds fan, we were playing Pittsburgh, and they were like a very small minority. That's what it looks like. And we're only half done with it, because this is the east side of what the new neighborhood called the Banks is. We're now in the process of developing the west side. But we also didn't forget the public amenities that people wanted. And so we have put in place what we now refer to as Smale Riverfront Park, which is a tremendous place that includes steps and water fountains and water features and swings and gardens and a memorial to the Black Brigade, which was very important in the defense of the city during the Civil War. And this is only half done, because we are completing the western side of the riverfront over the next 3 to 4 years. But this has come at a price, and this is what I mean by capacity. And I'm not advocating that every city has to spend this type of money. But sometimes you can have a vision, but if you don't have a strategy and aren't willing to seize opportunities and then amass the money as a result of those opportunities, you don't get things done. And so when we look at the amount of public investment that it has taken to actually do something which has been a vision for the city for over 70 years to redevelop that riverfront, the tally is $1.4 billion in public investment. But the consequence also is that we have a small riverfront park, and we had the political will among the elected leaders supported by the business community to redo a park that, for a city the size of Cincinnati, $120 million for a park is a lot of money, quite frankly. And we have managed to raise 97 of it, and the city itself has put in, as you can see, almost 35 million. The banks, which is the residential retail community, which is 18 acres, the private sector has invested money in that. And as a result of all this work, within the last 6 months, General Electric announced that they were going to locate one of their major facilities with employment of up to 1,800 to 2,000 people at the banks in downtown Cincinnati. And that is something which I think really epitomizes in terms of the potential for job return and investment by the private sector. And it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't begun the turnaround. Now, the turnaround didn't just stay with the banks, it also went beyond into downtown, and there's another neighborhood called OvertheRhine, which is just on fire in terms of redevelopment. But I don't want to talk about those. What I want to talk about now is some of the things we learned that we're trying to apply to neighborhoods from the success that we've had at the banks and the success that we've also had at the other place I referred to, OvertheRhine. So as we look at planning for the future, what we have done is we have adapted the first comprehensive plan in 30 years. We adopted as part of our zoning code a form-based code, which for all intents and purposes, you can easily describe as it's a code that allows communities to maintain their character, okay? Those things that people love about their communities, that are unique, that they're attached to, that it allows them to, even in the midst of redevelopment, maintain character. And we also began expanding the financial tools available to neighborhoods, and that was a key part, because in the city of Cincinnati, what we had come to realize is that whenever we talked about community redevelopment, it was always thinking of federal support for that. It's declining, it's not sufficient, and we had to think at a much larger scale. And so we began the planning process. And again, it was with an intensive process of community engagement, as you can see here. And what I always love is it included the last thing, which is that we actually involved children in the planning. We asked them, what do you want? Because the thing I like to remind everybody who's my age and a little younger and maybe a little older is that at the point at which we're doing plans, they can't be for us. When many of these major investments will only pay off after 30 or 40 years. You know, you're really planning for your children and your grandchildren, and so you should ask them what they would actually like. And that community plan also focused on the fact that Cincinnati needed to stand up, finally, in our region and say we were actually proud to be a city. And we were proud to be an urban core. And we were proud of all of that, what that meant, because it is very different from the rest of the region, very different, and that we were not going to continue to either apologize for it, and we also weren't going to try to imitate the suburbs, that we understood what our market was and who our market was, And that's who we were going to appeal to. And so that meant that our walkable, safe, communities that had a mix of people, a mix of incomes, were what we wanted to actually restore and revitalize, that we were going to focus that approach on our neighborhood corridors so that where there were centers of activity. And this really represented a shift in all the planning the city had ever done, that for the first time, and it's in history, which is significant because Cincinnati was the first city in the country to officially adopt a master plan in the 1920s. This was the first time any of our planning as a comp plan focused on neighborhoods. And people were very proud when they came up with this vision, and that it was a vision for a future of Cincinnati is focused on an unapologetic drive to create and sustain a thriving, inclusive urban community where engaged people and memorable places are paramount, where creativity and innovation thrive, and where local pride and confidence are contagious. And that planning process had guiding principles, as I mentioned, focusing on centers of activity, linking those centers with effective transportation for maximum accessibility. It doesn't do any good if people can't get there or they can't get out of their neighborhoods to go to other places. Where it's appropriate in those neighborhoods which are isolated, creating new centers of activity. And then, again, embracing our history, maximizing our industrial reinvestment in existing industrial areas and not pretending as if we no longer, that they were dirty industries. Industry, we are in a new age of industry, and our cities have the ability to reap the benefits. And so our process of looking at neighborhood centers, typing those neighborhoods in terms of, whether they really were core neighborhoods or urban centers or traditional neighborhoods, looking at the degree of change, quite frankly, meaning what were the neighborhoods that were doing well and with a little tweaking are okay? What are the neighborhoods that are in transition and need to be stabilized? And what are the neighborhoods where you have to put in major resources to help them turn around? We had never, ever done that before. Never looked at it in that type of depth before. And then we overlaid with it and looked at where in our city do people not have access to an automobile? And this was a very illuminating map, because if you look at every area that is light purple, the light purple means that in those census tracts, approximately 22 to 50% of the households do not have access to cars. Where you look at the dark area, that's 50 to 75% of households do not have access to a car. And so when we're looking at how do you actually create vital communities and linking those communities to one another, but linking people to resources is vital. Without adequate transportation, people remain isolated and disconnected. And so we looked again also at buses, where buses ran, and what we realized was that what we had to do was to link our transportation planning also with our community revitalization. And so we did all the maps, we put them together, and we adopted it as a plan. And we also adopted as part of it a new tool called FormBased Codes, which gave communities the option through this code to really, through a visioning process, have in place a zoning code that would allow them to create, in some instances, or maintain the type of community character that every single person wants, which is basically a place that's walkable, where they can go and they can buy groceries, that they could go out and pick up something to eat, that they could shop and retail. I mean, it's exactly what people want. And again, that process involved a citywide visioning process, a neighborhood visioning process for neighborhoods that wanted to be intensely involved in it, neighborhood by neighborhood, working with urban designers as well as technical people on city staff to try to determine what was reasonable and feasible. Each neighborhood then taking it to the level of applying their vision to a plan. And two neighborhoods, one College Hill and Walnut Hills, actually adopted a form-based code And because, for example, in College Hill, this is an okay street, but a lot of the retail is abandoned. A lot of the buildings, quite frankly, don't function anymore for good